Do we have to go into numbers?
Hey,
Yeah.
you're a stats guy, right? Yeah, of course we're going to go to
Numbers are our
numbers.
friends. Yes, I know. I've been in the field since probably 1992 is when I got to Loyola as a part-time faculty member there. I am a personality psychologist. My work is on the big 5 personality dimensions. I did a postdoc with Casa and McCrae, who are some of the major innovators of this model. And when I got to Loyola in their pastoral counseling department, I found it interesting because I am a spiritual religious guy, and to be able to look at, in fact, I should have sent you this article. Lisa Miller was the editor of the journal Spirituality and Clinical Practice. And one of the things that she did is that she would invite some of the long-term people in the field to write a story that answered that question. How did you get here? What brought you into the field? And in my response, she invited me, and I wrote a piece for her. But it was interesting that it all went back to a Saturday night at a local college bar where I was hanging out with a couple of friends of mine, and we're just enjoying the scene and the music. And I was one of the people that was there was this guy Mark, who was a doctoral student at Fordham University. And at that time, Mark was probably the most intelligent guy I've ever met. And he was a very bright guy. He went on to become a physician. He's an anesthesiologist. And he was a rabid atheist. And I had just, in fact, left the religious life. I went to Iona College, which is in New Rochelle, New York, because I wanted to join the Christian Brothers. And so that's where they sent you, was to Iona. And I spent a year there, decided that lifestyle wasn't for me, but that didn't ruin my faith. But he was like, why do you believe in this stuff? Religion's crazy stuff. It's like, you're majoring in psychology, you want to be a scientist, you're into all the data. How can you then go into this whole field? And I tried to my best ability to make an argument for why this made sense. But I felt that I failed completely and miserably in my defense. And going home that night, I just had the thought in my head, actually a little prayer, I guess you could say, just saying, I would love to have the opportunity to scientifically demonstrate the value of faith. And that was my little prayer, to be able to scientifically show people like this guy Mark, who is a very bright and scientifically oriented guy, on his terms and in his methods, why this is important. And when the job at Loyola came up, it was like that prayer was answered 20 years later, 15 years later, that now I had an opportunity to apply my skills in a way to examine the issues of spirituality and faith, and to see what value is there. Is there scientific value that we can demonstrate for that? And that's where my research began, and it paid off handsomely. In that there's a lot of value to our spirituality. There's importance to it. And from my point of view, when we think about who are we as human beings, what is it that makes us unique creatures? And we are unique creatures on this planet. But psychologically, what are the defining features of our humanity? And in my 40 plus years in the field, there's only 2 dimensions that popped up as being uniquely human. The first one, and hold on to this one, is schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a uniquely human disorder, that there are no animal models to it. We can't create animal models for schizophrenia. So it's seen as a uniquely human disorder. And it's a breakdown in meaning making is what schizophrenia is all about. And the other side to that is what I call the numinous, which is the creation of ultimate elaborative meaning. So this whole meaning-making, existential type quality, in my mind, seems to be a psychologically defining feature of our humanity. So engaging with this dimension, for me, is engaging with the most intimate aspects of who we are as people, our hopes, our aspirations as a species, as individuals, as cultures, is all wrapped up into these higher order ultimate existential questions that we all need to deal with.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
Oh yeah.
We'll bookmark it. So I want to ask you, Ralph, about your own upbringing. Of course, if you're a man who has, dedicated the large part of his career to this study in this field and seeing the value, it's really cool to hear you also talk about, there's folks who already, for whatever reason, they already know, they already enjoy on a day-to-day basis probably the value inherently of spirituality. But in your story about this guy Mark, who again sounds like a brilliant guy, and yet for whatever reason is not convinced of the value. And so you're saying, okay, but I want to talk his language. I want to bring the skeptics, bring the people who are just like, I don't know, I don't get why there's value here, and say, I don't want you to miss out. Here's the take as rigorous as you want of the scientific method to see why there's something here, why there's a there, right?
Right.
And of course, I'm curious about your own family upbringing and your background and what faith tradition your mom and dad were. And so jump in there and tell me.
Sure.
Our listeners,
I was raised Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Italian descent, and went to church every Sunday. I went to Catholic school, and at one point decided to check out the religious life as a way of moving forward with my own spiritual connections. Because for me, the most important relationship in my life has been my relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I found that a very supportive, a very healthy, a very growth-producing encounter, ongoing encounter, and it has led me to where I am today.
Yeah.
So there's something there. Now I've looked at this from a lot of different perspectives. There's this could be a psychological fantasy. This could be, there's in psychology we have this term, a folie à deux, which is two people get together and they just create their own language and they have their own way of doing things, but it's solipsistic. It's all about them. And I wonder, is this just a solipsistic aspect of me? Is it just me conjuring up these illusions and these fantasies? And is it all make-believe? But I tended to think that it can't be a folie à deux. It can't be pathology, because it has had such a positive impact on my life. As a psychologist, someone who studied health and mental illness, one of the things that we could say about mental illness is how it holds people back. It's a negative thing in their life. It impairs their ability to freely engage in relationships, to make free choices in their lives, because they're bogged down by fears and anxieties and worries that keep them locked up. And if my relationship with God was one of these pathological dynamics, why would it have had such a positive impact on me and brought me to where I am today? So that helped me rule out the pathology issue as an explanation for this. And it's just my belief that there has to be something there because of the positive impact it's had on my life.
Right. So, and let me jump in and say I can certainly appreciate that, and I'll play kind of like devil's advocate for the person who's hearing your language and says, "Well, sure, great for Ralph and his life, but what about generalizing and extrapolating to other people and look at the harms committed." Let's use the Catholic Church, for example, right? And say, like, look at how human beings across time and across cultures, like, it's not like there's not plenty of evidence about how corruptible we are, and look at the kind of harms that can happen. So to that kind of cynical or pessimistic, and someone who takes the view and says, look at these Ralph's after the value and the meaning and that, and so on the other side of that coin, what about all this stuff that like is absolutely cruel and unusual and terrible, tormenting, and in the name of religion, or in the name, I don't know if it's in the name of spirituality. Usually when people talk about this, they usually more demonize religion than spirituality, as spirituality is kind of more personal and to the individual, and religion is structures and systems and organizations, etc. But so I'm curious, you've certainly, I have to imagine you've contended with those arguments from time to time. So
absolutely. It's a common thing that I hear, but interestingly enough, that's not the point.
Yeah.
The abuses that all religions have committed over time. People's real problem, I think, when it comes to religion is narcissistic injury. I think that's the important thing that drives people away from faith. I found, informally, I haven't done a research study on this per se, but a lot of people who have a very antagonistic attitude towards God and faith and spirituality oftentimes are people who at some point growing up got disappointed in a major way by God. And this could be when a parent got sick and they asked God to let the parent get better and the parent died, or child prayed to God to keep their parents from getting divorced, but they got divorced, or the child prayed for something important that was really important for them and they didn't get a yes to their plea. That's more where the damage occurs. That's where people are really turned off by God, because they put themselves in a position where they really passionately embrace the idea that there's a loving God, and the idea that this God loves me so much that certainly they'd want to do something to help me in this life-altering circumstance that I'm in, and they come away with nothing. And that's where they get their antagonism towards the spirituality and religion. Here's an interesting finding from my data, and that one of the scales that I have is called religious crisis. This is a very interesting scale, and it's a very psychologically important scale. It's the scale where people believe that God has rejected them, that God does not love them or finds them of no use or value. This is a very, I like to call it existential condemnation, is that when you believe that God has rejected you, what do you do about that? What court of appeals do you turn to get that overruled? Well, there is none.
Right.
And people who feel that life itself is rejecting them are in a tragically dystopic emotional state that's associated with suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, major depression. I mean, it's just a very negative place to be. And yet, when I give this scale to atheists, a large percentage of them, probably close to 40%, score high on the scale. Now, why would an atheist score high on a religious crisis scale? Do you feel that God is rejecting you? Yes. It's like, but you don't believe in God. But yet, that's the issue, that they feel that God has rejected them. So it's almost a simplistic knee-jerk reaction. Well, if you don't like me, I don't like you.
Can I pause you for a second? You can, because I imagine the hyper-rationalist atheist is disagreeing with the premise. You know what I mean? Like to speak from their perspective, the idea would be like, hold on, the question is asking, do I feel rejected by God? And I reject the presupposition that there is any kind of a separate sentient being that's doing any kind of loving or accepting or rejecting of me. And I'm just curious on that scale. Is it a Likert scale? How is it? You know,
it's a psychology. There's 5 items on the scale, so you get a continuous score from 5 to 25. And it's a normed scale, so we know what low, medium, and high is from a population perspective. And like I said, about 35 to 40% of atheists are scoring high on the scale, and which consistently. It's not just one study. I found this in a number of studies, and it's hard for me to pull that together, other than the belief that I think some people are atheists because they got narcissistically injured at some point.
Let me flag that for a second. You're familiar with Robert Sapolsky?
No.
Okay, so he wrote. He has like this famous. I think he's Stanford. He's a Stanford guy, neurobiologist maybe. If you Google Robert Sapolsky and like why do zebras get ulcers or something, that's a kind of a famous presentation that he does. He wrote this book, Behave, and then there's the newest book. I see him doing the circuit, and he's on Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast, and they're talking about free will and determinism. And it was so interesting that, an hour into the conversation or wherever it was, he talks about the moment that he rejected the notion of free will and said it must be determinism. And it happened to coincide with the moment that he also rejected God. And so when you talk about the sort of narcissistic injury, I would be curious how many atheists or agnostics have a autobiography that does have some story nested. I want to share really quickly with you and listeners. I'm pretty sure I've talked on air about this before, but I when I was 8 years old, Now it's my oldest who's homesick from school, so it's okay. I don't have to get quiet here. When I was 8 years old, I remember finding out. I'm a little brother. My older brother is 4 years older than me, and I found out about Santa Claus. And my little 8-year-old brain did these parallels about the guy, who knows if you're naughty or nice, and he's always aware of you and watching you. And I'm like, there's a lot of parallels to God here. And when I found out that Santa Claus was not what I thought he was, just completely generalized, and was like, oh, therefore that the adults have been saying this to me about Santa, they've also been saying this to me about God. And it took about 10 years of wrestling with that until I was 18, and I'm like reading some old college paper from freshman year in undergrad and being like, and now I'm sure that God does not exist. And so I share that because I'm now very much, I don't even identify with the notion of I believe in God, because that seems to cheapen this kind of the shore knowledge of the divine. And my 20 years spent in the desert of atheism, you can trace it back to that little 8-year-old boy who was like, oh, so that goes right to this rejection or this crisis. But it, rather than being rejected by God, it was like, oh, I've been betrayed by the grownups. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I think there's definitely a there. And I'm also wanted to ask you, Ralph, about your own faith journey, whether you've talked with your parents or not about it, did you ever doubt the existence, and not just you, but also did you ever talk to your parents about, did they ever doubt and things like that? I don't want to take us too far off track where you want to go, but I am curious about that.
Well, again, I came from a blue-collar working class family. My mother was very pious, although I used to give her a very hard time about her faith. I called her an idolater, which always endeared me to her, because she'd spend her time, praying on the rosary beads and praying to Mary. And it's like, the whole idea of our faith is to pray to God. You're a Catholic. Jesus came as a highway to God. It's like, there's God, and you're spending your time talking to Mary and this, and you have your statues and your pictures. So yeah, I would always challenge them. But my road, my spiritual pathway, like I say, spirituality and religion have always been very important to me. And my relationship with God has always been a personal relationship. Because when I was a young kid in Catholic school, I remember listening to priest comes in, talks about, the religion and stuff. And they was always saying, God wants to be in a personal relationship with you. And I was like, a personal relationship with me? Yes, with you. I thought that was a compelling idea. I said, what the hell? Well, I didn't say what the hell. I said, what the heck? Let me give it a shot. Let me see about this personal relationship and what that really means. Is that really true? Does God, this big being, really want to be in relationship with 8-year-old Ralph Piedmont? And the answer I found was absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've always found a very strong connection with God. I remember one time getting in trouble in Catholic school. I was a little bit older and saying, what's all this talk about Jesus? Isn't it always about God? Shouldn't we worship God the Father? And the priest saying, well, when you worship Jesus, God understands. It's like, that doesn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. So I've gone a long way. I don't consider myself Catholic anymore. If you're looking for a label, the label that I use, I see myself as a non-Trinitarian Christian. In that I only understand God. There's one and only one God out there, that Jesus is the Messiah, but he's not God, because that's not the message that's out there. So that's where I am today. It's a very kind of like a unique place. But there are many other faiths like Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Church of God. These are other Christian groups that are non-Trinitarian as well. So it's interesting. I spent a lot of time studying the Bible, reading about the Bible. As I tell some of my friends, as I have these discussions with folks, that there's a big difference between studying the Bible and Bible study. that they're two very different agendas. And most people, as part of their faith, do Bible study. And Bible study is where you read the scriptures along the principled lines of your faith. This is how your faith interprets these scriptures, which is different from studying the Bible and understanding it as a living, developing document who many people have contributed to, and many different ideas and values have influenced it, and learning to discern which voices are the voices of people and which voice is the voice of God, kind of thing. So I've always been studying the Bible kind of guy and trying to get closer in my understanding of God and what that really means. And a lot of that is all my research in the numinous on spirituality also worked in conjunction with this spiritual quest of mine, and that some of the data that I got from my research about what spirituality is and what it's representing directly fueled my own spiritual reflections and spiritual growth and helped to inform me, and I think to get a real good picture on what it's all about out there. And so, when we talk about the numinous is a very interesting concept. I like to think of it as being existentialism plus a transcendental time perspective together, these two things. And they all address the key, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but there's three key existential questions that everybody has to answer. Not just people of faith, but even atheists and agnostics need to answer these questions in order to live their life. And these questions are, in order of importance, is death the end? Okay, what happens when I die? Is that all? Is there more? Is there meaning to life? Or is it all chaotic and really just random? And finally, am I a good enough person in the life that I'm leading? Okay, does life itself judge me in a positive way for how I've been conducting myself? These three dimensions are at the heart of the numinous. And when you look at it, every religion answers those three questions. And that's why religion is so important to us, because it provides easily accessible answers to very complex existential questions. Is death the end? No. You have an eternal soul. Is there meaning for life? Yes. God has a plan for everybody. We're moving in a certain direction. And am I good enough? Well, because God created you and you're a creation of God, that makes you good enough. But if you feel you've gotten off on the wrong track with something, there's always the possibility of divine forgiveness to bring you back into the fold. So this is why religion's so important to us. It addresses these very important existential questions that we all need answers to. And once we have these kinds of positive, supportive answers, we're able to more freely engage with life.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something. I got to go back a little bit because I planted a flag here on the non-Trinitarian. So let me close that circle first.
Sure.
So what's your take on the Holy Spirit? Right, the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you say I can get behind the reason why I don't necessarily identify as a Catholic anymore is because I'm not fully really on board with the Trinity. So you identify as a non-Trinitarian, and so you can get behind God the Father. Do you look at Jesus as like a heck of a philosopher, really charismatic, really successful, like ethicist, or what's your take on the Holy Spirit? I'm just curious to elaborate on. I've never heard the label as a non-Trinitarian. So
well, let's put it this way. Find me any reference in the Bible to the Trinity.
It's not there.
There really are no valid scriptural references for a Trinity anywhere in the Bible. So where this comes from, it really, and I challenge people. I said, who put that idea into our faith? Well, it comes from the Nicene Council.
Right.
They're the ones with the big Trinity. But where did they get the idea? Who put that idea out there? And, I challenge people, do you know who's giving you this belief? Well, it goes back to some guy, Tertullian, the 2nd century theologian who was a convert to Christianity, put forth the idea that Jesus was God, and that created a whole line of theological thought that found its fulfillment in the Nicene Creed, but there's nothing scriptural to it. I mean, I mean, even with Jesus, Jesus never called himself God. He never referred to himself as God. And it was clear that Jesus was not God. Because if Jesus is God, then a lot of passages in the New Testament don't make sense. What is this? God takes on human nature? Can God really do that? And what does that really mean, first of all? But, you know, when Jesus went with John the Baptist and the voice from heaven said, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." Well, if Jesus is God, is that God talking about God and how God is pleased with himself? I mean, when you start unwrapping this in many practical ways, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, where does the Holy Spirit come from? I have no clue. I really don't. In fact, there's a very interesting book I read. It was called Christianity's Self-Inflicted Wound, the Trinity. And it's a whole book just debunking the idea of a Trinity. Now, most of the book is trying to aim to show why there's no reference for Jesus as being God. Okay. One chapter in this 12-chapter book is devoted to removing the Holy Spirit. I mean, they're just like, there's nothing here. Oh, let's move on.
Okay.
But with Jesus, it's a little bit more, they go into more depth and detail. But there really is no scriptural reference to this. So why do we believe it? Why do we have these beliefs? You know, when I look at the Bible, what I've realized that when you read the Bible is a very complex book. It really is. And I can, on some level, understand why, you know, back in the 1950s and earlier, the Catholic Church didn't want people to read the Bible. And it seemed, for many years, I thought that was really arrogant or whatever, but it is a very complicated document. There's a lot going on in there, you know, and to be able to understand this document, you really need a lot of training and study and knowledge about where it came from, who's writing it, where it comes from, to be able to make sense of what's happening there. And it's the same. So I can understand why they say don't do it, because it's complex. The Bible is like listening to a chorus. You know, if you listen to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, you've got hundreds of people singing to you, creating this melodic experience to you. And that's the Bible. There are literally hundreds of people who are writing things in the Bible. But out of all of these hundreds of voices, one of those voices is God's voice. And being able to find his voice in the chorus and to listen to his notes is a very challenging thing to do.
Oh, go ahead.
And I always try to focus in, and I think I've been spending my whole life on this. So again, understanding and knowing who God is, I really think I know God's voice. And I think I can pick his voice out of any crowd of voices out there, because his message is simple, it's clear, and when you hear it, you know you found truth.
Yeah. So, okay. So let me pick up on this for a second, because I'm so grateful to be talking to you, because Sarah, our mutual colleague, Sarah Boone, knew she was like, these two guys. All right. So my brain is, it's not just the jolt of caffeine I got right before coming here. My brain's going a million miles a minute. So, okay. So I want to speak to the Holy Spirit for a moment. Sure. I don't care what you call it. You can call it the Holy Spirit. You can call it the Atman. You can call it Buddha nature. You can call it whatever you want to call it. They're just kind of like what you were talking about when you study different religions and saying, you know, here's what they're all addressing, these three existential questions, right? Mm-hmm. And there are many religions that also point to the same phenomenology, called by a different name. We'll just use, in the United States, the most prominent cultural name for it would be the Holy Spirit. I think we have most of the U.S. is Christian of some portion, although I know that there are studies throughout the decades who have been saying the nuns are actually, you know, the people who don't identify, right? They are on the rise, etc. But they are. And I just want to say, I remember being in my 20s and being like, yeah, we are on the rise, you know? Yeah. But what I want to say is, in my work as a clinician, for, I don't know, about 8 years, you know, there was nothing in grad school. We were taught how to not impose spirituality on your client. You may have atheists, agnostics, or people who that's off topic. That's off limits rather. Right. Not that I do that now, but there was no model of marriage or family therapy that incorporated spirit at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, for the last 2+ years, what we're calling the Holy Spirit or Buddha nature or Atman is exactly the thing that possesses me, that I, as a Robin flesh body, allow it to embody inside of myself temporarily while I'm in session. I try to walk around with my daughters and wife, but no, we're all covered with all this other stuff that traditions will call sin, etc. But that to me, even so kind of like the rationalist or the skeptic or even the nihilist, right, who says it's all bullshit, it's meaningless, no one cares. You can actually run experiments to prove the existence of this Holy Spirit, of this Atman. And also, if you are knowing what you're doing, know how to do it, there's a lot of plant medicine and psychedelic experience that make it like, whether you want to run that experiment or not, the curtain, it's like the Wizard of Oz, you'll see behind the curtain. So I just want to say that's, for me, I too, I guess I don't even, if you were to ask me, Robin, what do you identify as? I was raised Episcopalian, but I don't know that I am really a Christian, because I like to describe it as just, there's something there with where all the religious traditions and wisdom cultures converge into this great Venn diagram. Where are they all overlapping and pointing to something? There's something really valuable there. I also want to pick up on, Ralph, something that you said earlier in our conversation about the numina. You said there's two things that make our species really weird compared to the other. Maybe you didn't say weird, but unique. Yeah. Unique.
Much better, right? Than weird.
Yeah. Which is, you say, schizophrenia. Now, I am curious if animal models have shown multiple personality disorder. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at that or not, but I'm curious about that. But we'll just leave that for a side. So schizophrenia and the numinous. And what's interesting about, well, let me ask you, that's really curious that it's those two things, because I'm curious, what do you see a relationship between the experience of what it's like to be plagued by voices? For most schizophrenics will report, even though there's many kinds of hallucinations, tactile and visual, most are afflicted by the voices, auditory hallucinations. I'm curious if you, in your study and your research, have looked at the relationship between the experience of schizophrenia and the experience of being touched by spirit, the good guys, so to speak.
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. In fact, I've got a couple of books out here that I got that's exactly on that topic. It's recognizing that people who are schizophrenic or having psychotic experiences can also be spiritual people as well. And spirituality can be important for them, but it's interesting. And we need, as you know, psychiatry tends to see religion, spirituality as a negative, mentally unhealthy perspective on life. So anytime you talk to psychotics or schizophrenics and they're religiously preoccupied, we see this as the rantings and ravings of a crazy person talking about crazy things. But these authors really pull it out and say, no. And that what you're seeing is a person's spirituality that's somehow being disrupted by a pathological process.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that they're really crazy or that their spirituality is crazy and maladaptive. It could be a positive thing. But usually what we see in florid psychiatric symptoms or psychotic symptoms is we see the negative aspects of what's going on there. And we see how, again, it's mental illness. Mental illness is a destabilizing, emotionally labile experience. I mean, things come apart. There isn't the fluidity that we normally see in healthy behavior. We don't see unified strivings. We see a breakdown in personal meaning making, but also the interesting place to look is in the self. How do schizophrenics see themselves? And their sense of self is very, very volatile, very fragile. I remember I want to point this out. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for a couple of years after college. I had the key. I could get out at any time. I just want to make that clear. But anyway, we had this was in New York. So we had a lot of interesting people coming through. And I always loved when we get artists, and it seems that there's a high percentage of artists among, people who have various psychological disorders. And I think that's because they get a very interesting insight into humanity that they're able to touch on and capture in ways that can be very surprising to other people. But this one young lady was an artist, lived in New York City, and like many artists, she'd carry a little sketchbook with her. Wherever on the subway or walking, something would catch her eye, she'd sketch something down for it. And I remember looking through her sketchbook, and it was interesting to see from the beginning of the sketchbook, as we moved through the book, as the mental illness began to become more florid, as the psychotic symptoms became more florid, things became very, very different. And then they became bizarre and threatening and unusual. And at the end of the booklet, right before she came into the hospital, there was a picture there. It looked like a dead tree. If you imagine, you see these swamp trees with the arms like this. And I remember looking at it, very rigid, very fixed. And I asked her, "Who's that?" And she said, "That's a self-portrait. That's me. I'm frozen. I can't move. I have no ability to go places." And then when you turn the page, the final picture was almost like another self-image, but it was like she drew her head and torso like cracked glass. If you shattered glass, what that would look like. Yeah. And again, her sense of self, her sense of identity was fractured and ready to just burst apart into a million pieces. That's the problem of mental illness and how it impairs us. And that's why I say, well, schizophrenia is a cognitive disorder. It's a breakdown in meaning making, such to the point where my whole sense of identity no longer hangs together. And the opposite side of this is the numinous. It's like a bipolar dimension where we create elaborative meaning, where we create, the whole thing that religion gives us, which you were talking about before, is the belief that this life is only one stage in a larger ontological process, that we are eternal beings. And somehow that idea is an exceedingly freeing idea for us psychologically. It enables us to become very passionately engaged in life, to go into, as I like to say, to go all in for life, for something where I give my heart, my mind, my soul, and I'll give my life for something willingly, because it's all part of a process. If I'm not going to die, killing me doesn't stop me. I just move on to something else. And you look at people like Martin Luther King, for example, when he gave his "I Had a Dream" speech, that was right before he went to Tennessee, and people would say that he seemed to have some premonition that he was going to die there.
Right. That's right.
But it didn't stop him. He knew, I have to do this because I'm all in. And I'm a transformative guy. I want to transform this world into something better. And I'm all in on it. And if I die, well, I die. But I need to do what I need to do.
You're making me think of... Oh, go ahead.
That's what religion is giving us, that ability to go all in on life, passionately, fully engaged, and in an excited way, wanting to reach out and transform the world into something bigger and better.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about MLK Jr., I associate to Socrates and the fact that he also was like, he listened to his daemon, and his daemon said, "They're going to kill you." And he said, "I'm going to stay." His friends said, "They're going to kill you. They're giving you a chance to get out of town." And he's like, "I've always listened to the daemon, and the daemon says to stay.
Sure.
I'll stay. Even if it means I'll die." He was sort of all in on his relationship with this spirit being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gandhi was the same way. Jesus is the same way. Buddha was the same way. I don't know if you're familiar with the novel Quo Vadis. There was a trilogy, Ben-Hur, Quo Vadis, and there was a third one. I can't remember the term. But the whole idea of Quo Vadis means which way. And it's a story about the persecutions of the early Christians in Rome. And they were going after St. Peter. And St. Peter was feeling the heat and decided, time for me to get out of here. So he's walking out of Dodge. And as he's walking down the Appian Way there, who does he run into? He runs into Jesus walking into Rome. And he goes, my Lord, where are you going?" And he says, "I'm going to Rome to be crucified again." And Peter turned around, went back in. because that's the commitment that people make, that we realize that it needs to be done. And it's a very powerful, transformative force. It is the essence of our humanity, why we do all the things that we've done and accomplished all the things that we've accomplished, is because of our ability to see and be and act in a transformative manner.
Yeah. I want to expand upon something you said regarding those three existential questions and the notion of, is there meaning, and am I a good person? Because I, in the last year-ish or so, have come to understand schizophrenia in a radically way. And I want to share that with you and our listeners. When you refer to it as a cognitive disorder, most Western academia and Western medicine view schizophrenia this way, as hallucinations that are random, that don't follow a pattern necessarily, and that can be, people are harmful to others, they're aggressive, they kill themselves, etc. And so the best they've figured out how to do is to contain people. Before pharmaceuticals that we have in nowadays, there were straitjackets and restraining. I mean, there's even there's a story in the Bible of there's a guy possessed by a demon and he's restrained in a cave. They have him chained up in a cave. Now, psychiatrists are not going to conceptualize paranoid schizophrenia as a spiritual disorder, like you were saying before. They don't really incorporate or integrate spirituality in medicine. Now, other cultures, they're not making that mistake, and they're getting better outcomes. And so for the people afflicted with this, what we're calling paranoid schizophrenia, they get two different kinds of outcomes. One is that the person is rid of the voices. They're gone. You were saying earlier about how easy it is to identify God's voice. Like, I know it when I hear it. I know it at a deep, visceral, guttural level, right? So with schizophrenia, the voices are very good. They're like a wolf in shepherd's clothing. They come in and they act like they're you, and you don't know that you're not them. So the self-portrait that this woman drew about being shattered and fragmented and desiccated dead tree, that makes perfect sense to me. When you conceptualize schizophrenia as a spiritual disorder, and you actually begin to encourage or invite the afflicted person to dialogue with their voices in a way that treats the voices with respect, with dignity, with personhood. And even though the voices tend to run a pattern of negativity, they inject fear into the person. The question about, am I a good person? The voices have an opinion about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And that's like, no, and so you actually, when you run these experiments again and again and again, from the first person point of view, you say, read Psalm 23. The voices react to that like worms on a hot iron. They actually react to spiritual material. And so when you basically love these voices, and by the way, I've seen this not from a schizophrenia perspective. I look at the voices that people are afflicted by, that schizophrenia is on an extreme, on a normal bell curve, they're on the tail. And garden variety mental disorders, like generalized anxiety disorder, or dysthymia, or these things are also, people have this thought in their head, like, I can't reach out to a friend, they don't really care about me, I'm a piece of garbage or whatever. And that also is an external voice that's not the person. So their sense of self gets really warped and really distorted. And so what's interesting to know is if you treat the voices as sovereign beings, and you meet them with love, you meet them with the same energy, like Buddha mind, Holy Spirit. If you meet them with that, which is basically the powerful, positive side, whether you want to call it God or a drop of the divine embodied in a person, you're basically, what you're doing is, these things basically bug out. There's a hierarchy of them, and lower order ones bug out. So they get, so that I mentioned two outcomes. One outcome is the voices go away for good. They're gone. The second outcome is the voices are now the person afflicted by the voices knows now that they're not them. So the sense of selfhood is protected, and so they know you're just lying to me, and they're not distressed by it. So they can live a functional, meaningful life. And what's really interesting to know is people not afflicted by schizophrenia, when you go down to deeper levels, hypnotherapists know this, Jungian psychotherapists know this. When you go down to deeper levels, you encounter things that are not human. And what's really interesting to know, as a total rationalist, say, let's run some experiments and see, can we recognize patterns in these things? How do they behave? They act the same way. In someone who doesn't have schizophrenia, you find this being that's not you, and it seems to carry the belief that it was lied to by God, that it was betrayed. It doesn't trust. So when you give it love, when you give it compassion, even if you use this playful imaginary language, like, I've got a little drop of compassion, would you be willing to just spread a little bit on your lips and see if it'll actually burn you like acid the way you think it will, or if it'll actually make you stronger? And so you're not interacting with the patient or the client. You're interacting with the entity, the being that's inside of them, known by another name. We call it a spiritual presence experience or a possession. But when, people don't walk around the grocery store like that, because this stuff is so buried deep when they're on the normal bell curve, when they're not in a prison or a psych ward. So these things tend to have that reaction to spiritual energy, love, the higher self, the Holy Spirit, whatever it is. So I find that really, really compelling. And most Western programs, psychiatry programs, Western medicine doesn't really, because they're like this. We have no business. It's kind of like separation of church and state, with academia. So they're not. I guess our culture is not really integrating that knowledge the way they are in India or Ghana or Thailand. They get better outcomes. So instead of exporting our methods, we really need to be importing their methods, because at the end of the day, if you just want to be like, let's do outcome research, where are people getting effective alleviation of suffering, we should be importing. So anyway, I'm curious what your thoughts are about what I'm saying.
Sure. I agree with a lot of what you're saying here. I think the problem is this, that what's going on a lot of times in schizophrenia are existential crises. And again, these existential crises are being framed through a pathological process, that's chaotic, that's disruptive. So we see all kinds of weird things that an outside viewer may say. But here's the point to this. I don't know if you're familiar with the 5-factor model of personality.
Yes.
There's 5 dimensions: neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. Neuroticism is the dimension that is most strongly related to mental illnesses of all forms. In fact, the DSM, in my mind, is a paean to the dimension of neuroticism, because neuroticism underlies, it really does, about 96% of all the disorders there. Now, sociopaths, narcissists, neuroticism is not a problem there, but for all the others, and is the major predictor of those outcomes. One of the things that I've shown in my research is that the dimension of worthiness is a second independent pathway to mental illness. Okay, that when people have a crisis of worthiness, when they believe they are unworthy, and what is it that the schizophrenic is hearing? You're no good, you're bad, you're evil, you're fill in the blank there. It's all of this debilitating feelings of unworthiness. This is a second independent predictor of mental illness. And that, and again, that's what my data I try to show, and I have shown that worthiness adds predictive power over and above neuroticism to predicting mental health outcomes. And in fact, I believe that there's disorders out there which are currently intractable for treatment today, are there because we're not looking at worthiness, like moral injury, body image dysphoria, suicide, Also, substance abuse is another breakdown in worthiness. That unless we're going to bring this dimension in, we're not going to be able to cure these disorders. Though we need to recognize these existential dimensions because they're core to who we are. And if we're not going to engage them, we're never going to treat the problem effectively. So I agree with you. Modern psychiatry, but here's the point: how do we get them to see a different way? My favorite 4-letter word: data. Okay, through research, through data, through scientific studies that are based on reliable and valid scales and useful designs that show that yes, indeed, worthiness makes a difference. In fact, I've done research showing that worthiness is this independent second pathway to mental illness, and showing that it's relevant for all people, not just believers, but atheists and agnostics as well. Because when you're feeling unworthy, you're not in a happy place anymore. And it's an unhappy place that really is our soul that's unhappy. And neuroticism is not our soul. Neuroticism is managing negative affect. Worthiness is our identity and our soul. And if we're not going to reach into that, then these people are going to continue to suffer and not find any solutions to their problems.
Yeah, that's total. I want you to be shouting that from the bell towers, right? Like from the hilltops, Sound of Music style. Like it's really important to say if we're going to have any kind of an impact, we need to be able to demonstrate it with data.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm curious about that because I just turned 40 last Saturday, and
sorry about that.
Yeah. and I seem to be opening up a new chapter in the trajectory of my occupation and career and profession, and that is to do just that, not just as a clinician help people in a one-on-one setting or in group work, but simultaneously try to bring that kind of positive influence at the larger systems level so that we can again just get more bang for our buck and help scale up healing people and at the very least mitigate suffering. So there's a couple things here. One, what's that guy's name? He did studies on mystical experiences. He has cancer now. He NIH, what's his name? Gosh, it'll come to me, but he developed like a scale or a questionnaire or something that was measuring mystical experiences, and he was using it with I think it was with psilocybin. It was some sort of psychedelic research. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Griffiths?
Thank you, Roland Griffiths. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Roland Griffiths.
They used one of my scales in their research. My Aspire.
That's so cool. Which scale did they use?
The Aspires, the assessment of spirituality and religious sentiment scale.
Yes.
As one of their outcome measures.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's why it's, when it comes to doing numinous interventions, what I find to be the active ingredient, I love this term. I came across it about 2 months ago with one of my graduate students, but what it creates is what I call an immersive time fluid experience. And that when you get into psilocybin, or even when you get into any, if you look at films like Avatar or It's a Wonderful Life, all of these are immersive time fluid experiences where you get to look at time from many perspectives at the same thing. It's a mind-blowing experience. In fact, I was watching on PBS. I don't know if you watch it with Gates. I can't remember his first name.
Henry Louis Gates. Henry Louis Gates.
Yes, him, on What's Your Roots. And I was watching the show, and he's going through with these people. This is your 26th great grandfather, who did this and he did that, and this is your great grandfather. What would you say to this person? What have you learned? Again, these people's minds are blown because they're just scooting through time in this fluid way, getting all of these very different perspectives on life. And that's what psilocybin does. It puts you in this fluid experience where you can engage life on multiple levels almost at the same time. And that's the numinous. That's what it's all about. And as just one more little point on top of that, I've moved from spirituality to the numinous because it gives less pushback from other people in the field. And when you talk about spirituality, some people just turn you right off. It's like,
right.
bullshit. No, I don't go there. I don't go there. I don't want to talk about it. Don't want to know about it. But if you get rid of the term, and that's why I picked the term numinous, all of a sudden people are like, well, what does that mean? It opens a door of engagement where you can explain this in a way that's not going to be threatening or provoking the wrong kind of filter in people. So that's why I like to use the term numinous. It keeps it more general, less religiously tied, and captures the same qualities.
Yeah, that's brilliant, right? So like the phrase in my mind is like smuggle in, right? Like the idea of it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Not Trojan horse style with the negative with the negative connotation, but like, just the idea that like, oh, we're going to use language that's not so triggering. Because if we use triggering language, immediately you're just shut out, ruled off, and that's really smart to do that. I was curious if you found. I've heard anyway. I haven't read up on anything to substantiate it, but I've heard that psychedelic experience of that, like basically the 5-factor model that people find like. I mean, I've heard many people, including yourself, talk about this, that you can kind of do a longitudinal study and capture the data and then do a follow-up and say, this stuff is relatively stable.
Yes.
However, psychedelic experiences, I'm thinking about the trait openness to experience, and how psychedelic experiences, mystical experiences, nudge that needle on a person's personality scale. Have you found that like pre and post test on psychedelic experiences or mystical experiences that people on the other side of those actually now their personality structure, they're more open? Have you found that to be the case?
Well, what I find, again, big 5 personality traits don't usually change. After age 30, they're set in plaster. Although I am one person who has data out there that showed personality change in response to a substance abuse program that was spiritually based, showed some changes that were maintained 18 months after treatment. But I think, and again, this comes from Roland Griffith's study, one of the things that blew me away was not so much the change in personality, but the change on spirituality, in that people's scores changed an entire standard deviation.
That's big.
Big. That's beyond big. That's huge from a statistical effect. Again, this one experience that they had over a 6-week period of time, their sense of the transcendent, their sense of the numinous, whoppingly big effect. Whoppingly big effect. In fact, the effect that I found in my substance abuse study was a half a standard deviation change. I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
His change was like, wow, that's twice that effect. So I think what's really the most important thing is not so much. Now, McCrae has done studies looking at personality change and what are some of the moderators of that. Openness to experience was one of the variables he looked at. Are people who are open to experience more likely to change their personality because they're open to new ideas, new experiences? And he found no, it wasn't. But that's the great thing about the numinous. Unlike the other big 5, it is a tractable dimension. It can change with time, and it can grow, especially as you get older and become more concerned with these existential issues. You can plumb the depths of this dimension and grow in this dimension. And that's to me, that's the payoff to the project. That's why people are walking away thinking, oh my God, my life is different. Because me as a human being, the big 5, you can measure the big 5 in your pet dog and cat in a reliable and valid way. It's they're evolutionarily significant dimensions, but only the numinous is about me. And in fact, Roland recruited in his early studies a number of our students in pastoral counseling at Loyola to participate. And when I talked to some of those students, almost uniformly, it was the single most transformative event of my life. It had the most important influence on me as a spiritual being in my entire life. And these are people who are 40, 50, 60 years old to start with. Yeah. So that's what's happening. It's unless, who cares what the big 5? It's the numinous that's changing. And when you change that, you're changing the very quality of somebody's sense of selfhood and how they engage with the world. So to me, that's, if you're looking for the power, that's where the power is in the numinous.
Yeah, and I totally agree. This is something I didn't respond to earlier in our conversation, but it's like, so what do I want to say about that? So first of all, the mystical experiences, the contact with something that is non-human and benevolent, say, it can be so transformative. I was thinking about, like, what are the sort of garden variety transformations that people experience that are not necessarily touching something divine, or maybe that's not the first word they associate to. It's like, well, how about becoming a parent? It's like, well, maybe that does feel, it's like, this is a gift from God, this new child, right? People use that language all the time, but a lot of people get transformed when they become a parent. And I'd be curious to know just kind of what, on personality dimensions, how that kind of life transition compares to a mystical experience. But either way, I associate to that as being just transformative. And when you have a mystical experience and your fear of death goes away, that goes back to one of those existential questions of, like, is this it? Right? Is this it? And when fear of death goes away, that's a huge game changer. Like, if you can remember, because the thing is, like, again, in my viewpoint, a personality is not unitary. It is a society, essentially. Like, it's the same way that we have a village of external people. I live in a neighborhood community, and there's, your friends and your neighbors and stuff. You also have that inside, from my viewpoint, that you have, so you could have transformative experiences, and you, whatever you call you, this, we can call it a unitary self for a moment here. I'm now enjoying the metaphor of considering the self to be this clearing in the middle of the woods, this glen in the middle of the woods, that's what you are. You are this spacious awareness, and creatures that are in the woods can come into that glen, that can come in and they can go out. It's like the person, when you have a trip booked and you're late for your flight, there's a creature that comes into that glen that's saying, hurry up, hurry, we're gonna, and that kind of state experience that might present as a little more neurotic, that's not necessarily who you are. That is another being. I look at it as spirit possession, essentially. It is that a person, a human being, is a collection of spirits. That you, at your core, are the glen in the middle of the woods, and you are susceptible to the good ones and the evil. I don't call them evil. I want to call the ones who are not wounded, or who were wounded and have healed, versus the unhealed and wounded spirits. We talk about substance abuse, or talk about the feeling of unworthiness. These things get into us, but they can also leave us. And I feel as though, when people have a transcendent experience and no longer fear death, that they can sort of be there to be this stable caregiver that reassures the spirits that come into the glen and are like, but we're going to die, or we just got diagnosed with cancer, or, there's temporary states of forgetfulness, of we could call it neuroses, I guess. I'm curious what you think about that metaphor, or how you look at
it. It's certainly a good metaphor, but we're leaving something out.
Please.
And we've touched on it, and you just touched on what you said, but we really haven't named it yet.
Okay.
So we need to name this thing, and it's called time perspective. That we all have Kurt Lewin's field theory. I don't know if you're familiar with Kurt. He came and left. He died very prematurely. But he came up with this notion of psychological time perspective. We all have some time perspective that we use. Some people are past oriented. Some people are only present oriented. Some people are future oriented. And what we know is that when it comes to time perspective, the more future orientation we have, the more mental health, stability, and resilience we express in our lifestyles. In fact, Phil Zimbardo came up with a scale called the psychological time perspective scale, and he measured past, present, and future. He showed that people with a future time perspective are better than those with either a present or a past. And in fact, he was so enthralled with this future time perspective that he created another scale called the transcendental time perspective. It's like, why does time have to stop when I die? Okay.
Yeah.
What if I just saw no end to time? What if, like I said, this life is merely one step in a larger ontological process? When I start creating a transcendental time perspective, an eternal perspective, people reap the best benefits psychologically from that perspective. There's more resilience, coherence, more satisfaction to life. We can deal with the ups and downs to life a hell of a lot better because we have this future time perspective. Having a child puts you into taking a more long-term future time perspective, and this is where even atheists worry about these things. I like using this metaphor for doing this. Think of a pond, nice, quiet. You look at the water, it's all placid, reflecting the sky. Everything's very nice. Then you put your hand out there with a little pebble. Your pebble is your life. You drop the pebble, it hits the water, the pebble quickly goes to the bottom of the pond, and it's done. That's our life. We're here for an instant of time. But even though the pebble went to the bottom of the pond, the ripples that the stone made on the surface of the pond continue to move onward and outward in that pond. So the recognition that our life, even though it may come to a terminal physical end, there are implications to that life that may continue long after we've died. Being mindful of that takes us to a transcendental perspective. We think about kids. You just turned 40. I just turned 66. Again, what is it that I'm taking care of? I have 2 grown children. And my wife and I are putting our estate together, and it's planning. What do we do when we die? Where does our possessions and wealth, how does that move forward? What is it that I want for my children, my grandchildren, and my grandchildren's children, kind of thing? That's a numinous perspective. So yes, we're in the clearing in the woods, but it's not a static reality. There's a time perspective that we're looking. As we look into the woods, we have a perspective there. And if it's a future-oriented perspective, it's a lot better than having a current or a past perspective.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you're saying. There's a couple of things that come to mind when I hear you talking about it. One is on the time dimension. So if we feel the finitude of our life, if we feel almost like, like time claustrophobia, kind of, if you will. Yeah. This idea of just being very narrow, that can be really distressing. And when we can open up the gate, if we can kind of see that those gates that are there temporarily, or however they got there, if we can not just ask ourselves the question, is that an illusion? But if we can actually experience the reality of, oh, actually there's something timeless and boundless now, at least let's just stick with time for a second. If something's timeless and we don't have to be so preoccupied, I got to get it all done in this life, kind of thing, right? We can relax. And I also associate it to something I think this is one of the Buddhist traditions where there's doorways to awakening. And one of the experiments you can run is if you stub your toe. And if you stub your toe, you're unloading the dishwasher, you stub your toe, and you go, and so all your conscious awareness and attention goes to the toe where the pain signal's happening. So all of your focus, rather than focusing on the universe or even just the kitchen, or even the whole body, you're localized now on, ow, my toe hurts. But if you can drop into the pain without any analyzing or resisting, if you just drop the reactivity to the pain and just look at it like a neutral observer, it may hurt, but if you can actually drop back, you're suddenly opening up your perception, the boundaries of your body. And it's like, the analogy is kind of like water in a bottle versus the bottle in the whole ocean. It's from a bounded nature, when you open up from the pain point, it's oh, there's so much more capacity and spaciousness. This little itty bitty thing in the toe, Oh, I can contain it. And by the way, it's not a way to bypass the pain. It's not some sort of mental hack. It is literally the spatial component to the time, to kind of the time dimension that we're talking about instead of being so narrow and claustrophobic, opening up. And suddenly when we have infinite time or infinite boundlessness, there's a spaciousness and a timelessness that holds it all, that really is kind of like something akin to the flow state, where you're not preoccupied. You're just in this. I don't know how to. One of the qualities is ineffable. It's hard to articulate what it's like.
Absolutely. I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the other end of it.
Yeah.
When you have this really, you used a very nice term, cramped, claustrophobic time perspective.
Yeah.
For many years, I was always trying to figure out what's the opposite to spirituality. So, I mean, we're spiritual, we're open to the big cosmic infinity, but what's the opposite of that? I mean, I looked at a lot of variables like narcissism, materialism. Nah, it wasn't that. I finally, about 2 years ago, found the term. It's called hyparxiolatry. That people who have this very constrained sense of time experience what's called hyparxiolatry. And it sounds, the olatry should give you a hint to what it is. It is when it's a selfishness, a miserliness about your own life. It's the worship of your life, that is the most important thing, that I need to just keep this toe needs to be taken care of because it's my toe, and if the toe ain't working, I ain't walking, and I got a problem. But hyparxiolatry is when it becomes so immediate that it's only the reality of you. You're not narcissistic, but you're focused on keeping and maintaining the integrity of your life. You're not selfish, but you prioritize your needs above other people's needs. So that's the constrictiveness that we're getting, this worship of me and trying to hold on for dear life to my existence. And of course, we know it's a mug's game, because eventually the life's coming to an end. Yeah. So somewhere along the line, you're going to need to deal with that and get out of the immediacy of things and be able to take that broader perspective, that ineffability of like, wow, it's a whole universe here, that I'm just such a small player, but I'm an important contributor to the process. That's the numinous.
Yeah. So 2 things there to respond to that. I really, really appreciate you introducing that term to myself and our viewers and listeners. So it does sound similar, though, I actually don't like the term narcissist or narcissism. Just all the language in the DSM is pathologizing, and I do view that kind of what's referred to as a personality disorder as rooted in an injury. It's rooted in an injury. So the whole notion of someone kind of worshiping themselves or prioritizing themselves is born out of, we could call it a coping mechanisms, but it's really born out of a felt sense of injury, of being harmed emotionally from a caregiver, usually, right? And but I do associate. Yeah, I do associate to that when you talk about what's the opposite of spirituality, and that it's instead of being boundless and focusing on just instead of you're in the world, it's like the world is in you, and you're just there to help others and serve, and the opposite of that is only serve myself, or only serve myself. And it does when you said the phrase, I think, self-worship, I associated to kind of that narcissistic cluster.
But
I
also not narcissism.
Say more.
It's not narcissism. It's preserving what I have. Like a miser preserves their money. I don't want to spend it. I'm going to need it for later, kind of thing.
Right, which is fear-based.
Right.
It is fear-based. We could also say there's a lack of trust.
Absolutely.
I don't trust that I will be provided for. I don't trust that God's plan actually has a way of taking care of me, even if it seems as though I've drawn a shit hand and I've been dealt terrible hand.
And that's a lack of hope.
Yeah. I wonder if you could speak to the importance of hope in a person's psychological well-being.
Well, hope is a fruit of the numinous. It's a belief in the goodness of life, that something good is going to happen there. It's also part of our faith. I again, when I have my discussions with folks, I always ask them, how do you define faith? And more times than not, people will say that faith is belief in things that have no proof. And I always say, well, that's not true. That's stupidity. Okay. Believing in things that haven't been proven, try living that out in your investment life. You know what I'm saying? Try living that out in other aspects. You see how far you get with that. But faith is not belief in things without proof. Faith is trust without reservation. It's this sense that there's something out there that I trust. And the only way I can trust it is if I know it, that I have experience with it, I've engaged this reality, and that it's consistently shown me that it's trustworthy. And so I can take a step out on faith. I can move in this direction because I have trust that whatever's out there is going to meet the need that I have at this time. So, and that's where hope comes from. It comes from this trust in that there's a goodness to life, and let me not try to overwork it, but let me embrace it and see where it takes me. Now, again, for some people, they've done that and they got hit over the head with it. And so they walk away thinking, well, I'm not going to do that again. And we have that narcissistic injury that pulls them away from looking for trust and for allowing things to work the way that they need to work. And that's the problem with alcoholism. Substance abusers, they're trying to control too much of their life, and they can't control it. It spins out of control. Hence the substance abuse there. That's why substance abusers are so narcissistic, and why spiritually based programs work so well with them.
Yeah,
because the first step is getting over that narcissism. Acknowledging your weakness, acknowledging your powerlessness. That's the first step to go in getting through it. And only a spiritual paradigm is going to take you to that place, because we need to have that trust.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Trust and humility. Right. The whole, when you said the word control, that really speaks to it. The sense when you talk about miserly, it's the felt sense like, oh, if I make these decisions, then I'll be safe. Then I'll be okay. Not just now, but future me will be also be safe. And and the sense that like I have to make these decisions, they're in my control. So as long as I do this, I'll be okay. Right. That operates on the presupposition that I actually have control over how this thing goes.
And we don't. Ultimately, we don't.
That's right.
That's why, when it comes to one of the good things that I see in my model of the numinous is working with meaning. I think the numinous brings in existentialism very nicely, but takes it to the next level. Like when it comes to meaning making, I have a thing called the logoplex in honor of Viktor Frankl and his logotherapeutic approach. Now, Frankl thought if you have meaning, that's a good thing to have. Meaning versus non-meaning. But one of the things the numinous teaches us is that not all meaning making is the same, that there's better meaning making and there's weaker meaning making. And we've created this circumplex model with the two major dimensions of meaning, which is self versus other, and hyparxiolatry versus transpersonalism. And people who are locked in what I call the solipsistic dimension, which is very hyparxiolatric, very selfish, that's what they're doing. They're trying to hold on and control. And that's why their lives are so easily disrupted by things, because they don't have that ultimate control. And they're not thinking through all the major implications of what they're doing. So other factors seep in and work to overtoss their apple cart. And that's why they're always in a heavy state of psychological distress. It's what mental illness is from a traditional psychological perspective.
Yeah.
So we need to move people to a more transformative thing, which is a more transpersonal, social-oriented way of creating meaning.
I'm thinking about what you're saying through the framework of values, right? When you say not all meaning is equal, right? And saying there, right? If you and the way that's mapping onto how I'm listening to it is just like, if you value these things, that tends to not have great results in terms of psychological health and well-being. Versus if you value those things, we say, what are the values of the numinous, or what are the value in the circumplex model that you're talking about?
Let's map Schwartz's value scale onto it. That's what you're doing. In fact, I just got a pile of data. I translated my numinous motivation inventory into Chinese. And so we've just got data coming back. We gave them the Schwartz scales. But again, things like hedonism and power, these are on the lower end of the meaning-making schedule. But things like benevolence and transpersonalism, these are at the higher end of meaning-making. So yes, our value orientation is very much linked up to our meaning-making approach as well. So the two are very much compatible and integrated with each other.
Well, and I'm also thinking about in the spirit of trying to help alleviate suffering and identify where someone is on this map, and where, if we want to move the needle in the so-called right direction and say, okay, through a certain, I don't want to say experimental condition. It sounds so like cold and scientific, but from a clinical, just through certain sets of experiences, say, and then you come out the other side, and now actually you've shuffled the deck a little bit, and your value, how your values are kind of sitting in a hierarchy, have actually swapped up a little bit. And what are the things that help someone, not through coercion, not through sexy campaigning or whatever, but through their own subjective first person invitation. Okay, let me try it that way. Like, how do we move the needle so that people are actually embodying the values that are more psychologically healthy? I'm curious, from your experience, where do you take that question?
Through immersive time fluid experiences.
Say more.
Again, when we look at things like It's a Wonderful Life, or Henry Louis Gates' Your Roots, or Avatar, or these kinds of experiences where we get to suspend the kind of cognitive structures we've developed to navigate life. We're taught to think this way, act that way, because it works very well in reality. But when we get beyond that and engage our true imaginative capacities and start looking at life from many different perspectives. Are you familiar with the painter Escher?
Yeah.
Escher? Yeah.
MC Escher.
I love him because there you go. He's got people walking down steps, up steps, across steps. That's our numinous capacities to think in such creative, non-controlled ways that give us insights and understandings. We're thinking outside the box, literally. That's what changes all of these values. And like I say, the term that I'm using is an immersive time fluid experience, where, like we see with the psilocybin and with other kinds of experiences that people want to create, that's when we unlock our potential. That's where, for whatever reason, the rigidity of our sense of self mellows out and becomes a little bit more flexible and can be rearranged.
Let me share this. This is what's coming up for me as I hear you say that, just from the clinician's viewpoint out.
Absolutely.
The way I work with people to heal their trauma, what trauma does is it does take something that's built open and it makes it super narrow. It really, it kind of ossifies when someone experiences something traumatic. It kind of it freezes a part of themselves. And the shamans knew this. The shamans knew, like, if you want to heal from a trauma that happened years ago in time, we can actually go retrieve that part of your soul. We can actually, so the self is timeless and boundless and is a time traveler in essence. The self can go back. Let's say, for example, 8-year-old Robin, the self, we're in 2024. I was 8 in 1992 or something like that. Like, okay.
Please, don't show off. Just don't show off.
So the point is, the self could go back there and commune with that little boy who went by Robbie. And that's that kind of transpersonal and time fluidity. Exactly. It goes back. And the shamans will say that's soul retrieval. You're going back and you're getting that little boy and you're bringing him back into the society of the present. And that's what seems to work in the way that I work with people, that brings that young part back. And it's bringing them into the present. Very important to do. Very important that the part that was traumatized is brought through time into the present. And there, where it's in the present, it can unload all of these big feelings and beliefs that it got. By the way, this is something I didn't say before. When you scratch in the DSM, all those different disorders, when you scratch to the bottom of the sandbox, what you tend to find is that felt profound sense of shame. So when you talk about unworthiness, you're exactly right. That rather than treating the symptom, you're putting a lot of energy, whether it's cognitive behavioral techniques of mitigating the symptom, or coping strategies, or pharmaceutical interventions. If you're not interacting with the original one who was wounded, you're just putting a lot of energy into bearing that over. You're not healing. And so when you can bring the one who was wounded into the present and heal them, then you're no longer expending all that energy. And you how do I say it? Yeah, I sort of lost my train of thought. And
I understand what you're saying. Freud talked about this. Freud talks about traumas as emotions that get frozen in our psyche.
Yes.
I don't know if he used this imagery or I brought it up myself, but I think, when scientists take core samples from the ice pack in the Arctic or whatever, what do they find? They find little bubbles in there that are atmospheric samples from 10, 15, 20, 30,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Just preserved the way they were frozen. And it's the same thing with our trauma, like you're saying. That little 8-year-old boy's feelings have been walled off from everything else. But all of those feelings are there in their pure form, just as they were experienced so many years earlier. And therapy needs to open that bubble and bring it back out again and have it re-examined in light of our new maturities and understandings, and to work through those feelings so that they're not disrupting the stability of our sense of self.
Yes. And here's, in my view, those traumatic experiences open up the person for beliefs to get in. And those beliefs are, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm no good, right. and those beliefs get stuck. Like I love the imagery of the bubbles, right?
Yeah.
And so, but just if it can get in, it can get out.
Absolutely.
And when you discharge the belief, this is what I was forgetting to say, is people assume that some violent criminal that goes and holds up a liquor store and has a gun in your face, that's like anger or hatred. It's the sense of worthlessness that drives it. When you talk to these men, it's like, when I have a gun in your face, now you respect me. Right? Like, I don't feel respected, right? I don't feel valuable. I don't feel worthy. So I just think it's a absolute bullseye to be able to, in the treatment and healing of people, to incorporate that sense of, you have to have some sort of experience that gets at that worthiness component. And because without it, it's kind of like what you were saying with 12-step, or like the spiritual component of surrendering to something higher. And that's I think what the guy, I don't remember his name, but the guy who developed 12-step, the phraseology was higher power as opposed to God, right? You can take an atheist out to an ocean and say, but that thing's bigger than you are, buddy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There are things bigger than you and more powerful than you, and you can't control it. Yeah. You got to acknowledge that.
Well, you got to acknowledge that. But in my view, there's all these parts of a personality, and you could say, well, 95 senators vote yes on that acknowledgement, but there are 5 holdouts and they vote no on the bill, and they say, I won't acknowledge it. And so you just have to get curious about these 5 holdouts, or 2 jurors on the jury. Why won't they agree? It's just let them sort of, to use religious language, taste and see, like, for themselves. You got to just meet them with where they're at, and don't jam down your theories and your data. Just invite them, get curious about, okay, tell me why, this that it's amazing how powerful compassion and kindness and patience it can be for someone,
Yes, very much so. But again, it's that worthiness. That's the key component for mental health. If you feel worthy, you're good to go. When you feel unworthy, you want to go.
Yeah.
Is what I like to say. People want to kill themselves. They want to medicate themselves. They just fall apart.
Well, and let me speak to that from a clinician's experience. And this is a very radical statement, but I will say it until I'm dead, or until the Robin body has transformed, right?
Yeah.
Which is suicidality is suicidality. I can't make an all or nothing claim here because that would be a violation of cognitive behavioral theory, right? Black and white thinking. But almost always is not it's not the consensus of the full totality of the person. You have a part of the nervous system, a part of the personality that has taken on the burden to say, this is a mercy killing where there's no other way to stop the pain. I can make it better. And that's what's going on, versus there's a part of the person that doesn't want to die. Even if you don't want to call about multiple, if we just say two, one that wants to kill themselves and one that wants that still has hope and says maybe this is a bad idea, but then it's just on any given day this one won out and we can't go back from that gunshot or that whatever, right? And so if you can negotiate with the suicidal part and honor what it's trying to do and say, you're actually a hero. I get your merciful tendency. You don't want to have to do this to the person. You talk directly to the part. You know you're going down with the ship. You just have no hope. I hear that, right? And it's like, what if we could not to try to prove you wrong out of spite, but what if I could show you that it's actually possible to go heal that pain and that you didn't have to do this? And the suicidal part's like, well, wouldn't that be good? I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can pull it off. And therapists have been proving these suicidal parts wrong day after day after day after day after day. The other thing to say about suicidality is that there are things in people's systems that are not parts. And we could call them evil spirits. But when you ask it, what's good about killing this person? Instead of saying something like, well, I'm the only one who can ease their pain, then they wouldn't have to suffer so much. That's a positive intention behind the part. But if you interview the part and it says, well, then that means I win. What's good about that? I win. Then it's not a part of the person. It's an external energy that got into them. Maybe it got into them through a trauma. Maybe it was passed down ancestrally. Maybe it got into them through some ayahuasca ceremony. They did some sort of psychedelic and they were out of their body and something jumped from someone else into them. That happens. You can get these things out. So I just want to, those are the two things I want to tell the audience about suicidality, is that rather than treating it as, oh, the person is just having a suicidal ideation, that it's a thought, if we actually treat that motivation of suicidality as if it's a separate sentient being with personhood and sovereignty, you can actually get amazing results. It's not a popular model of psychotherapy at all. It's very fringe. It's very weird.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But again, that's, yeah, I grant you that. But that is, that's sort of my, I don't know what the word is, not high horse, but it's like my mission. It's like, it's my
paradigm.
Yeah. It's a paradigm for sure, but it's a calling of not just doing this work, in groups or in single one-on-one sessions, but bringing that to the larger system. So I want to ask you, Ralph, about what kind of data, what would you recommend, given all of your thorough wealth of knowledge and the scales that you've developed and the research, years of your career? I'm curious, how can not just me, but someone who would want to shift the academic paradigm and show them how potent the numinous is in bringing and healing people's traumas and bringing about flourishing and more well-being, what would you recommend to go to? Let's say I go to Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I was born and where my daughters were born, and I want to talk to them about helping schizophrenics, for example. I don't know that they admit schizophrenics at Holy Cross, but what kind of data or point me in a direction? You understand the thrust of my question?
Yes, I think I do.
Yeah.
I'll give it my best shot. Well, you're coming. First of all, I want to say when I agree with you that what you're talking about is fringe stuff, I wasn't trying to make a judgment.
I know.
After being so many years in pastoral counseling, that fringe stuff was our mainstream.
Yeah.
So, but it is fringe stuff, because I talk to people who are not in pastoral counseling, and That's what they say. That's fringe stuff kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
right.
so I'm not trying to make a value judgment. I
gotcha.
think, I've been listening to you with rapt attention as you're talking about all this stuff, because for me, the cutting edge of knowledge is, how do I deal with worthlessness? We can talk about infinitude, we can talk about meaning, but when people feel this tragic sense of worthlessness, how do you handle that? I'm looking for new ideas. I'm looking for any ideas on how to do this. And you're bringing up some very spiritual and religious concepts and ideas. And that's what the mainstream field of science overlooks. When they hear religion, they reject it because, well, I'm not a religious person, I don't believe it. But what they've got to recognize is that when it comes talking about the existential issues of who we are as people, which is a defining feature of who we are, the place that has the most well-developed language about those concepts is religion and theology, okay? Because they spend thousands of years talking about exactly those concepts. Now, maybe we may, as a scientist, we may not agree with the terminology, but it is reflecting concepts and ideas that have value and validity to them that we need to engage with scientifically. So I think before you go off talking to people at the hospital, we need to do a research study, where we get you doing this with a group of people and measure pre and post to say, you may sound like you're on the fringe, but you're onto something here, because the data are showing the value of this approach. Your ideas, your paradigm, I think they're capturing important qualities. Maybe we could talk about them with a different language. Well, we can always talk about it with a different set of words, but the idea is there. And that idea is so important, that there's something else rumbling around here that needs to be acknowledged and engaged. Yeah. Now, you can call it an evil spirit, you can call it something else jumping in, but there's something that has to be engaged and needs to be worked with. And religious practices have ways of working with that. And we need to identify what are the key mechanisms that make this happen, and be able to identify them, articulate them, and to be able to use them and apply them in a reliable manner. That's what we need to do. Yeah. I value what you have to say. I think it's really great stuff.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, they're not my ideas. But I as sort of like a let me see for myself, kind of the same thing, right? The skeptic or the pessimist or the nihilist. It's like, okay, well, I don't believe, I think you're full of shit, but if I'm at least this much open to be willing to give it a shot or try it, I'm open to being proven wrong. I don't want to be wrong any longer than I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be. It's like, if I'm looking at a map and it says there's no holes there, but there's a hole there, I don't want to fall into a pit, right? So it's like, that's great. So, but yeah, it's the paradigm is beliefs are actually beings. If I could simplify it, it's that simple, that all of human suffering is the product of beings. And this goes back to the philosophy of good and evil and the spiritual war between, Satan and God, essentially, which is Satan and the whole hierarchy of minions below don't trust the love of God. And when you don't trust the love of God, there's all sorts of flavors of suffering out there for you. And if you can start to see whatever you're believing, if you can start to treat the belief as if it itself is a sentient being that's actually trying to have influence, like whispering in your ear, dressing up, talking just like Robin, so you think it is Robin, it's like, then it's like, what do they say? There's that phrase, like, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is to convince the world that he didn't exist. It's like, so these things can hide in the shadows and make you think that they're you, but they're not. And the moment you are hip to that, the moment you're onto that, they lose power. And again, we don't need to heal the person. We can heal the person as a secondary consequence, but it's like, heal the being that's in the person. So it's very much spirit depossession. And it would be great to demonstrate through valid and reliable research methods to show, hey, this stuff is not only effective, but it produces generative change, not something that like at 1 year and 5 year post follow-up that they've regressed. It's actually generative, and this is a portable thing. It's like they can now contend with new challenges in their life through the life course and have resilience and profound health and well-being as a consequence to, or as a result of these interventions, say. So yeah, I would love to be able to back it up with science. I don't know how one would do it, but your talking with you today has given me hope that there are methods to be able to incorporate here and to build on the sorts of scales that you've used. A lot of colleagues are like, Robin, why don't you get your PhD? And I tell them again and again, I'm not it's like when I did a break between undergrad and grad school, I took 5 years off and I was like, it's too much school. I don't want to do it. And then I went back to grad school and there's like, go get your PhD. It's like, no, I don't want to do it. So who knows? Maybe when I'm 45, I will actually go get my PhD, but I don't think so. But anyway, yeah, I would like to incorporate and build on what you've developed and see how it can be used to, again, help people heal. That is the calling. That is the calling now to not just do it one-on-one, but to bring change to a larger system, which sounds very grandiose. I grant you that it does. It's I want to win the hearts and minds of psychiatry writ large. It's a big goal.
Don't we all? No, I think my greatest contribution is the development of reliable and valid instruments that capture some of these important existential qualities in ways that have important psychological value, both interpretively and predictively about individuals, so that whatever paradigm you have, if you wanted to evaluate what you're doing with these entities and beings, well, again, you have instrumentation that I've developed that you can give pre and post and see how effective what you did was. And showing a change, that's the ball of wax. That's what will confound. I got to tell you this story.
Please.
If we have a moment.
Yeah.
Back in, when was it? I think it was like 2009 or so, Paul Costa retired from the National Institute of Aging, and NIH, which NIA is part of, threw him a PhET script. I think that's the right word. I have a problem with that. These long German words are always anathema to me. But what they did is they put on a full day seminar where they invited 5 people to come and give talks celebrating Costa's work on the Big Five and different issues of that. And they invited all the researchers and people from NIH. And I was surprisingly, I was invited to give the last talk of the 5. And so, okay. And my topic was, where do we go to now beyond the Big Five? Okay. Where's the future going? Okay, that's fine. So here I am. I'm in a room of about 200 people, all the major scientists, not just psychologists. We have behavioral geneticists, we have doctors, physicians, we have all these people there. And I got the Big Five, blah, 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 blah. I talked about some of the things I did with observer ratings, with this and that. And then I came to the real big point. What lies beyond the Big Five? Are there other dimensions out there? And I said, yes, there's spiritual transcendence. And I went on giving a data-based talk, all data, okay, showing how transcendence is independent of the Big Five, has incremental validity, cross-culturally relevant, shows causal relevance in predicting important, the whole thing. It pissed everybody off. One lady got up, a researcher from Duke University got up. I don't know this shit about religion and spirituality. I think it's a pile of crap. I'm not religious. I never want to be religious. I think this is ridiculous, and left. I just walked out of the room. But everybody, apparently it created a big stir in the room to talk about spirituality. And I felt very bad about this. Although the director of NIA was very gracious and saying, he was one of our postdoctoral fellows. It's nice to see that he's gone off the deep end later in his career and all of this stuff. But actually it was Costa who came up to me and was saying, he's become more of a believer in what I'm doing because it's all database. And he says, Ralph, what you should have just showed these people, what's the problem you have? This is a database talk. Here's the data. What's the problem? To say I don't like spirituality is ridiculous because here's the data. Let's call it something else then, which I now call it the numinous. But that's the thing. If you have data, people have to take you seriously in science.
Yeah.
No matter what your model is, and you could be talking about, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I can see how that could be antagonistic to certain psychiatrists and stuff like that. But when it comes with data, the question is, you got to pull your head out of your ass and you got to look at the data. What do you make of the data?
That's right.
And so we got to stay open to possibilities. And I think my scales can provide the kind of data that people in our area really need to find for themselves.
Thank you for sharing that story. I'm not trying to be an interlocutor with psychiatrists. I view psychiatrists as brothers and sisters in the same family. So
absolutely.
Right. So it's not coming to poke and provoke and insult. It's not that at all. It's saying we're all trying to row our oars in the direction of healing people who are suffering. Are we open enough and not foolish enough and wise enough to listen to each other and see if we can exchange ideas, interdisciplinary studies, and all that is in the academic tradition of science. Our peers we're trying to poke holes in people's research so that we can get something solid that we can all rely on.
Sure.
Certainly engineers want to do this so we can drive over that bridge with a lot of confidence, Now, when you share that story about that woman, in my view, this won't be a surprise at this point, given in our conversation, in my view, that was a being, okay, that swarmed into the glen of her inner forest, and because that being has been hurt, but somehow, some way,
absolutely,
in the religious context or the spiritual context of the relationship with the divine, the relationship with God, either in her own lifetime or through a direct ancestor. People inherit ancestral burdens, intergenerational legacy traumas. This has been demonstrated in rats, because if you can prove it in rats, it must be real, right? You can, the epigenetic studies, you can show this stuff. It's passed down. It's like, here's a little rat pup who's afraid of something that smells like a cherry, something that's not a threat to rats, but we've done experiments and we've passed on the genes that now we've trained it to intergenerationally learn that that's going to hurt you. Well, okay, so when she got up and she got triggered and provoked by what you were presenting, that's a being. And again, I look at that being that's inside of her as having every right to feel that way and to possess her body and storm her out of that conference room. And it's like, having the patience and the willingness, to invite the person. Would they be, can I learn more about why this is horseshit? Tell me about, I appreciate that you felt safe enough to voice your, disagreement in such a way. And you just, again, the kindness, the fruit of the spirit, the gentleness, all that stuff, when that's shown to these beings, they either run away from it because they don't trust it, because they think it's going to hurt them, or they're transformed by it. And they can actually move on to the healing realms because they're a part and not the totality of the person. Anyway, Ralph, I've so thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to ask you, is there anything that of course, there's plenty probably, but is there anything that comes to mind that we haven't touched on, we haven't talked about, that you think it would be important to share with our listeners before we bring this thing in for a landing?
No, just the value of the numinous as a sixth dimension of personality that defines us psychologically as a species, that it's an incredibly important dimension that we need to engage with. There's all different ways of getting into it. We need to get into it. We need to develop these ideas. Science needs to develop a language for itself to talk about these qualities, which it doesn't have at this point. But it needs to come up with a language. It needs people like you, clinicians who are out there doing this kind of work, other pastoral counselors. But what I would stress to them is that they need to collect good data. We need to measure some of the things that you guys are doing in the clinical world, because that data needs to be shown to everybody else in the family. And as we have these scientific discourses, remember, at the end of the day, it's data that drives the conversation. If you don't have data, then the conversation is not going to go anywhere. And I always found it very ironic that pastoral counselors are tapping into these key existential issues all the time. It's part of their training, part of what we do, but yet they don't want to collect data. for some reason. And, that was always my job at Loyola. It's like, we need good data. Numbers are our friends. We need to show the world the value of our services, because if we don't do that, then we're going to be ignored and shuttled off to the side of what's going on in the field. And that cannot happen. So that's where a lot of my research has come from, is to be able to do that scientific work that's going to compel these hardcore scientists to recognize the value and importance of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, sounds like having one foot planted in one realm and another foot that it knows how to hang out in the other realm, so that you can kind of unify, right? You say, if you don't speak this language, or if you can't stand on solid ground in this other place, you're never gonna have people, listen and take you seriously. Yeah,
absolutely. And people need to listen seriously to this, because it speaks to the most important aspect of who we are, the ability of people to become transformative in their orientation to the world. When people give of themselves and making an investment in life and improving, peace, and improving better, racial relationships, inter-country relationships, even their own family harmony and growth, that makes all of us better off in the world. And it's important that this work get done and be recognized for how valuable it really is.
Yeah,
I think that's important.
Well said. Well said. It's a good place to end it, Ralph. And for folks who are listening and want to learn more about you or read your publications, people, where can people find out more about you?
Well, they can go to my website, which is the Center for Professional Studies, oneword.com. You can read about the work that I've done. My articles are listed there. The measures of the NMI, Numinous Motivation Inventory, the Aspires, and other scales that I've developed. You could also order my book. I got to put a plug in for the book.
Absolutely.
The book came out, it's called Understanding the Psychological Soul of Spirituality. So it's providing the fact that we can talk about these esoteric issues of spirit and soul and our ultimate capacity as human beings. We can do that in a meaningful, scientific way. And that makes it real, that makes it substantive, and that's the way that the field needs to move into the future. So the Center for Professional Studies.com will be your gateway to all of that. Or you can email me at drralph@thecfps.com. More than happy to take your questions and provide you with any resources you may need.
Yeah, and that book that you just held up, that's my beach reading next month. I'm looking forward to it. Dr. Ralph Piedmont, an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate it. Good luck with everything, and I hope we can speak again.
Thank you.